what we try to do is to make sure that we combine methodological approaches. Because on one hand, as John mentioned, we really try to quantify all the effects and the relationships that we could. And therefore, we built 11 analytical regression models, 7 of them on destination level, local level, 4 on national level. But we really wanted to also understand some of the nuances that don't necessarily come from the fancy econometrics. And so we developed 3 surveys of policymakers, business executives, as well as general population, to really try to understand some of the and tease out some of the nuances. And we have also combined these with qualitative approaches. We developed 8 case studies that look at individual destinations and their experiences with addressing some of these issues. And crucially, the whole research was underpinned by 7 workshops with experts, policymakers, businesses on the ground across all of these 5 regions to really help us understand the nuances and the specific challenges in different destinations. So if you don't remember anything else from my presentation, these are the sort of distilled takeaways. So there are 6 key points that we found the most important and the most intriguing from all the modeling and all the surveying and all the case studies that we looked at. So firstly, and perhaps not surprisingly, we have found very strong evidence that visitors positively contribute to economic growth in destinations. But we have also seen that the impacts and the magnitude of impacts really depends on a destination's ability to minimize economic leakages and really attract high value added visitors in their destinations. And I will talk about all of these in a bit more detail, but related to that point, secondly, we have seen that this actually means that when we look at the outlook and the future outlook for destinations, destinations and geographies that prepare for attracting visitors and managing these flows really stand to benefit and see significant economic boosts in terms of economic growth, GDP growth, as well as employment levels. And thirdly, in terms of the impacts on cost of living, we have actually seen that despite the sort of popular narrative and a lot of belief that visitors really contribute to increased cost of living, particularly through housing prices, this impact is actually relatively small, and it tends to be concentrated in geographies, in specific geographies that already rely on income from tourism to begin with. Fourthly, and then really interestingly, when we looked at the social impacts, we have seen that there is actually a very clear association between visitors, number of visitors in a destination, and performances in terms of gender equity and gender equality and various measures of those. And that's what we really see as one of the sort of underexplored areas where we would like definitely to talk a bit more about the potential for visitors and the visitor economy to contribute to increased gender equity and equality around the world. Secondly, when we explored the impacts on local culture and social tolerance, again, we have seen that there is a growing public narrative around the threats of sort of undermining local culture and eroding local culture through a number of visitors, particularly in certain geographies that can feel overrun. But we have seen also that there is actually a clear perception of the benefits when it comes to improved social tolerance, improved openness to different cultures, different experiences, etc., etc. So again, a lot of potential for positive change. And then last but not least, when we examined the impacts, we of visitors on emissions and air pollution, we have seen that the bulk of the footprint is coming from transport to and from a destination. And then within the destination, there are factors such as the energy mix, underlying carbon intensity of the destinations that really, really contribute to the effects that visitors have. And so obviously visitors and travelers have a role to play in terms of the climate action, but it requires a much more systemic change and work across stakeholders. So that's a very sort of high-level, top-level picture. And I'll just run very quickly to highlight a few more details in each of these. So firstly, as I mentioned, we have seen across the board that visitors contribute to GDP growth, to economic growth. And you see a lovely little scatter plot there, very clearly showing that there is a clear positive contribution that varies between regions. We have also seen that there is a clear positive contribution to decreases in unemployment. These numbers, 0.2, 0.5, they seem a bit abstract, but when we looked at 7 cities in North America in our sample, a 5% increase in the number of visitors by 2030 could mean additional $110 billion for GDP of those 7 cities, which is a lot of money. And for example, for Johannesburg, when we looked at the impacts of unemployment, we see again that a 5% increase in the number of visitors could actually mean additional almost 45,000 extra jobs. 45,000 extra jobs by 2030 in Joburg alone. That's a huge number. But what we are also seeing is that what really matters and what's really important is how well destinations manage the threat of economic leakages and how well they manage to bring in the local businesses and local employees into the value chains. Secondly, and as I mentioned, this is slightly goes against the sort of public narrative and a lot of understandable perception in many destinations. And we see that, a vast majority of policymakers, as well as a majority of the general population, do believe that inflows of visitors contribute to increased cost of living in their community, which is understandable. We are all living in the cost of living crisis. But when we looked at this through the modeling exercise, we see that it is certainly the case in some of the destinations, but it's pretty much limited to those destinations that already have a relatively high reliance on income from travel and tourism. And even there, the magnitude is relatively small compared to economic and policy factors such as GDP growth, population growth, local lending rates, and unemployment rates. And so we really see that this is a systemic challenge that requires a systemic solution and cooperation across stakeholders. And when we looked at the potential policy interventions and what policymakers think about those, we see that housing supply actually is one of the sort of top challenges that they see. Turning to the social aspects, which I think is really, really exciting and really interesting, again, we have seen that the vast majority of populations believe that engagement with travel, tourism, and visitors into their communities actually has a very positive impact on the societal tolerance in their communities, when it comes to openness to visitors, as well as sort of their openness to cultures and different visitors. And so we really see a lot of potential there. And even more, I think, encouragingly, we have seen that there is a clear association between number of visitors into a destination and performance and various measures of gender equity. And again, there's a number of factors, number of drivers that we can see behind this, but one of the areas is employment opportunities that come from the sectors and industries that cater for the visitors, which tend to offer more employment opportunities for women in the local destinations, as well as smaller pay gaps than other sectors of the economy. And then last but not least, as I mentioned, in terms of the environmental impact, and particularly looking at air quality and pollution and carbon emissions, we have seen that majority of the footprint comes from transport to and from the destination. And when it comes to the impact and emission within the destination, what really is important are additional factors as well in terms of energy mix, in terms of the carbon intensity of the local economy, of the local services, and really the ability of the visitors also to contribute positively to the climate agenda really requires also cooperation on that local level across stakeholders. And then finally, and I think this is the sort of most sort of important takeaway in a way, is that what we have seen through all these sort of exercise of econometric modeling and surveys and workshop is that we really see that the visitor economy, economic growth, employment, and social and environmental programs are not mutually exclusive. But what they require is getting the policy mix right. So we have definitely seen that places like Chicago, London, Berlin, Lisbon have made a lot of strides in terms of attracting visitors, decreasing unemployment, improving their air quality, while places like Paris or Melbourne have really made huge progress on air quality and their economic growth. In Latin America, in Bogota, in Mexico City, Buenos Aires, we have seen huge progress on social inclusion. And all of this is possible to achieve, but it requires that coordinated and systemic approach. And crucially, what it requires on the local level is the right support and the right enabling environment for local businesses, as well as local employees to be able to participate fully and productively within the sort of broader visitor economy. So that's really it from the research. There is a lot more, as you can see in the long report. But before we jump into the exciting conversations, are there any immediate sort of pressing questions about the research, the findings, their methodology, anything like that to address right away? We'll have a lot of time for a Q&A afterwards, but if there's anything immediate, please, now it's the time to jump in.
Just a question from my end, Matus.
We do have one, thank you.
You talked about the issue of economic leakages when talking about the GDP growth opportunities of destinations. I wonder if you could comment a bit more on that, and if there are any regions where this problem of economic leakages was stronger.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's the sort of million-dollar question for a lot of the destinations that we looked at. We were not able to quantify the leakages explicitly, but what we know and what we have seen is that some regions and some destinations really see a huge amount of the capital that is coming in through visitors and through the visitor economy almost immediately leaving the destination. And that is the challenge of the leakages. So meaning that the capital, it doesn't stay within the economy, and therefore in terms of the economic benefits, whether it comes to employment, whether it comes to local services, local businesses, just doesn't stay within the community. And we are seeing that in a number of regions, a number of places in Asia Pacific, in the Caribbean, in Latin America. We see that there are destinations that up to 70-80% of the value that comes in almost immediately leaves the region, right? So what we are trying to understand and what we are trying to really showcase is how can destinations try to minimize those leakages, so really bring in the local productive capacities, local employment, but do that so that it doesn't really become too expensive or it becomes too prohibitive for the industry to grow. So again, it's a sort of the right policy mix, the right trade-offs, finding the right balance, because again, some destinations are struggling with it a lot. But there is a need to find that right balance for each destination. That balance is somewhat different. So it has to be really thought through the sort of local lens, local needs, and local opportunities. Thank you. All right. I think if there are no other urgent questions, then I'll just hand over to my colleague Liz for the fascinating conversation to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matus. Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Elizabeth Sukkar. I'm a senior research manager with Economist Impact, and really interesting findings. We do cover a lot in the report. We're so lucky today to have a policymaker with us who can give us that really unique perspective. So I'd like to welcome Armando Peres onto the stage. Hello, Armando. And who is the Vice President of the Tourism Committee at the OECD, as everyone knows. He's also the former deputy mayor of Venice and has worked very closely with the Italian government. So a lot of insight there. I'm sure we're going to hear all about it today. So my colleague Matus today talked about the economics of it all, how it does boost GDP, these overnight stays and everything, which is great, okay. But actually, who is it really benefiting? Can we give us a breakdown, in your opinion, who's getting the benefits from all of this economic growth?
Let me tell you something that I want to excuse with everybody here, because I just arrived because my airplane arrived late. The Heathrow Express, they found something on the rail and we had to stop for 20 minutes. Okay, then the business from Paddington to here, it took 40 minutes. So I'm late and I want to apologize with everybody. So I lost the beginning of the presentation. And so I'm sorry. Well, who is getting benefits? Of course, tourism. I'm in this business since 40 years, something like that. Mm-hmm. So I think I've seen a lot of changes and how all the economical sector has moved from what it was a few decades ago. It looks like yesterday, but it's gone a long time from the beginning of my story in tourism. But there are two things which are clearly good for tourism. One is they provide jobs. Sure. At the beginning it was just good news. Nowadays more than good news, because there are sectors of the economy growing and reducing personnel. Many sectors, useless to say, in technology, banks, whatever, oil stations. Nobody serves you anymore. You do everything by yourself. Not tourism. Tourism, one tourist more, you have 0, 10, 0, 15, depends. We have a number also on the report. Job available. And this is true everywhere. This is good news on one side. It provides jobs everywhere. 40 years ago, countries involved in tourism, there were maybe 50, no more than that in the world. Nowadays, everybody understood everybody understood clearly that tourism is one of the chances for the growth and providing jobs. The second point is that it gives not just one hand, two hands in order to help GDP of the destinations. And, jobs and richness, it's always good news because you modify things. Then on the top of this, there are other things because when you want to have tourism, you have to improve the quality of your streets, the lights from the airport to downtown, to provide services, to open new shops, to be, to have a better opportunity to invite people to stay and give them more chances to enjoy and stay longer and things like that. So
I'm hearing
good news. This is all good news.
So there's infrastructure benefits from it all.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of good, and there's also some other things that the sector needs to think about. So Matus talks about economic leakages, so it's kind of uneven around the world. So as a policymaker, I mean, how do you advise, mayors or local cities as to how they can better deal with, say, economic leakages in the sector? What have you advised them?
Well, let's say that in the last 20 years, we discovered one of the big points. And tourism grows, and it will continue to grow. We were always saying that. We were thinking of 2020 at the beginning. We said, when we will be there, tourism, the numbers will grow by 4.5% every year, and then it was true, or even more than that. Then when we arrived at 2020, we said 2030 it will be even more, 4%. No, then it was 6.5. Then it depends on which continent and things like that. But tourism was growing. Now we talk about 2050, and we know that, crossing fingers, without wars, pandemia, whatever it is, tourism will continue to grow, so big numbers, more members, with all the positive side and the bad side and the negative points.
So is it still the growth trajectory?
The problem that we discovered, not yesterday, but let's say at least 20 years ago, it was over-tourism. The problem is over-tourism. Physiological side of tourism, pathological side of tourism. When the tourism breaks the ratio between, in a destination, between the number of resident people and the number of visitors, then you have a problem. You start with having a problem. 2 problems, 10 problems, 100 problems, because whatever it's coming out in a very good way from the report that you presented today, which is very good. The analysis is absolutely perfect. Nothing new. I mean, it's something that we know. Who is working in tourism, we know the problems, we know the positive side, we know the things. And the proposals, which are all very good, on some of them, because then it depends on which destination you try to apply these kind of proposals. And when I think of Venice, for example.
You talked about...
So anyway, over-tourism is a problem. Another point is, for one of the weakest points of tourism is statistics, data. They are late, they are wrong, mistaken, confused. You can say whatever you want. This is something which I say, I've always said, how many tourists, 2.5 billion, 1.5 billion, but this is just international arrivals, no trips. You measure the GDP, direct, indirect, induced, total. How much is it? The people who, like, I'm talking to you, journalists, I read things, horrible things on newspapers, on magazines, on TV news, because people they read it, copy it, and say that's confusing.
So I'm hearing is the methodologies are not quite there yet in terms of...
No, you have always, of course, you have to be skeptical a little bit
Yes.
when you read numbers, first of all. But then at the end, if you have a little bit of experience, it's like when you're cooking. They say, you have to put the spoon off. Then you say, come on, it's 20 years I do it. You do like that. You say, it works. I'm talking to my wife does like that.
You have to admit, though, although we might dispute the numbers, we have to accept that. But up till 2019, it's been quite
for many years,
a successful
we were
industry.
just saying the turnover of tourism for the destination. How many billions, how many... It means nothing. If you have, I tell you something which is a stupid example, but if you are a Japanese who comes to London and buys a TV set of 80 inches and take it back to his, not Japan, because they have a lot of TV sets, huge and maybe cheaper, but let's say another country, and he takes it back, what remains in the London business hands? Nothing, maybe 10%, 15%, because you have to send it to the producer. So we decided, we said, no, turnover, it means nothing. We have to look for the real added value.
Okay.
Okay, TIVA, at the OECD, we call it TIVA, which is the added value of tourism. French or English, it becomes TIVA. Tourism added value, okay?
Do you think
it's complex.
Okay, I know.
That's why in Venice, we complain against all the Chinese-produced glasses, because they are cheap, of course, but we have to send more than 80% back to China to buy these kind of things. But in Venice, we are producing a lot of wonderful things made with glasses in Murano.
Can I ask you, Armando?
That is a big difference in added value, because if you do it in Murano, everything remains here. Jobs are here. The glass is here. The money remains here. And it goes to our banks, and we spend it for our children, family, whatever investments, and it is. So if you, for leakages, you mean this, or this is just one of the leakages you're mentioning. Of course, this is something that we are carrying. I'm talking as OECD now. All the countries of OECD, the member countries, of course, they know very well at this point, and they're trying to be careful and modify their policies on the basis that try to avoid, whenever possible, the leakages, starting from investments. For example,
would you say
hospitality investments? It's very trendy. Everybody's looking to buy hotels in countries like Italy, for example, my country. 80% of investments in five-star hotels are coming from abroad.
So do you think the pandemic has, do you think the whole sector is resetting? Was there a hard reset after the pandemic in terms of the environmental, social impact of tourism? Are they rethinking that? Because I know in Italy, in 2022, there was a new tourism strategy. They're thinking about it. All the other OECD countries are thinking about it. But what are the differences now? Well, what are we going to be seeing? A different investment? Is it the workforce? How are they looking at the workforce? What's changed now, would you say?
There is definitely, I have to just to say, pills, these things. One of the things, it's the attitude toward the sustainability. Yeah. Sustainability is at the top of the problems, together with over-tourism. These are the two big area of problems. Sustainability, and when I say sustainability, it's, of course, environmental, social, and economical. And
how does the sector compare to other sectors on this? Because I have to say I was quite surprised with the Glasgow Declaration. It only came out in, 2021 for a sector that, since we've had the global code of ethics on responsible tourism by the World Tourist Organization, it's taken a while for a declaration. I know it's voluntary, but nonetheless, what was the impetus? Why? And with this declaration, what change do you see will happen?
Well, when you tell me these kind of things, I have to think that one of the local problems of Italy, and one of the problems, which is a huge problem, is, for example, how long governments are lasting. This is extremely important in everywhere. If you have governments like in Italy, where we change every year, every 2 years maximum. When we have a government which lasts 2 years, it's something new. We had a couple for 3 years. But since the end of the war, the Second World War, we changed 70 governments and something like that. You have to put yourself in the trousers of the politician or the local government or whoever you want, who's a policymaker. He says, why should I take care of things which we have to invest a lot of money today and the benefits are coming in 10 years' time? I don't care about that. I want the votes next May. So whatever we say,
very short-term thinking.
we are going to vote in April. in May. I need something, results. I put all my colleagues in my room, small like this, and I start shouting, we need results tomorrow. You know? So to go for whatever then we sign on international documents and whatever, then when we close the door and start working, and I have worked, I've been, as you said, working with different governments in Italy, but always as a technician. I was never part of the political side. I was a technician. But I worked with center-left government, center-right, and now right government. Now no more, I'm not working with this government. The situation is always the same. The things are said in a different way when you go to talk on TV, you talk on an interview, you are outside in the street, you shake hands to everybody. Then when you close the doors, the situation is always the same. We don't have money. How can we get it? We have elections next week. I want results. You know, things like that. So the point is that if you want to tackle over-tourism or sustainability, you need a lot of money, but more than that, you need time, because you have to plan things, medium or long time, years, infrastructures, years, huge amount of money, transport, whatever, technology, things like that, updating in whatever, you need. Okay, so the only...
but you think the sector seems to be heading in that direction?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The point is
what
that...
was
no, but I give you an answer which maybe it can help. If you look at the governments, because the political side, the public side is always working at three levels: national, regional, and local. Okay? Three completely different mentality, ideas, approach, power. In Italy, for example, like in some other European countries, the most important level is the regional level. In Italy, the power, the amount of money, the investment, the laws are decided at regional level. Okay?
Yeah, makes
so
sense.
the government makes a sort of overvision, coordination, things like that. But then we have the local dimension, the local administrations, the mayors of the cities, to tell you an example, where the situation is completely different, because they last normally for 10 years, because they have a mandate of 5 years, but normally, and this is 80% of the time, it's like that, they can do a maximum of 2 mandates, so they stay for 10 years. 10 years is a good span of time to do things. And this is where tourism has the best results, at that level.
The municipal level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then, I may say a lot of things good, even at national or regional level, but let's say that the best results are there, where you can do a lot of things.
Well, I'm glad you raised regions, and I know Italy is different to Germany, and they all approach this very differently.
Germany, France, Spain,
but I'd like to
Japan,
kind of shift the topic.
They've been all my children. I've been chair of the tourism committee for 6 years, which was the maximum 2 mandates of 3 years. And so I know very well all these countries.
Yeah. So I'm hearing this tension between the city level, the municipal level, maybe the national level, and there's a lot of politics. But maybe we can look at Venice as a case study, because all the issues...
Let me tell you another thing.
Before you go to that, in a tick...
I'm sorry. I'm an old chair. I'm used to very old.
But Venice is an interesting case study, because all the issues we see around tourism kind of, are all there. And so now they've obviously going to introduce a €5 entry fee for people to come in, for day trippers, which is an interesting policy idea. In the report, we also look at the housing affordability issue, the cost of living. We have a lot of policy options in the report, looking at rent control, regulations, all of that. So in terms of Venice, give us a description of this policy. Do you think it's going to actually work? €5 seems quite low, actually. Do we need caps instead to limit the amount of people in there? But then does that break the Treaty of Rome, free movement of people? So, what are your thoughts on Venice then?
So the situation is in Venice, it's of course quite complex, because it's a huge... it's one of the most important towns in the world. Everybody wants to go to Venice. We have about between 30 to 35 million visitors every year in town, and the population of the historical center of Venice, it's 50,000 people. So the ratio, it's, you know, so over tourism, it's since many, many years, it's a big problem. Let me tell you that Venice has been relatively successful in applying many laws, policies, regulations in favor of tourism in the last 20 years. Many things have been done. I was just on the airplane this morning.
Yeah.
I was saying, what are the best things? Because, you know, at my age, you say, we've done nothing, it's always the same, the problems are never solved. Then I turn my head back and I return to think 20, 30 years ago, and I say, wow, we did a lot of things. So when I was on the airplane late, I put it down, things of Venice which we have done. And we've done a lot of things. The last one is what you're saying. To ask an entry fee to the daily trippers, which is something different from tourists. Tourists are the people who come and sleep in town.
Yeah, the overnighters.
The daily trippers, they are excursionists, as we say, technically speaking. And then the situation is even more complex than I will tell you maybe.
But do you think it's a good policy?
It
€5?
It is. No, €5.
Yeah.
But come on,
No,
this is absolutely,
I didn't think so.
absolutely not good.
Who knows?
But it is not yet decided, because now the situation is that in April, May, probably May, they will start a test. Now there is, let's say, a group of people, companies, technicians, where sometimes knowing all of them, of course, I know what they're doing. They will arrive to a technological project. There are many problems because of the identification, the problem of the privacy of the data, face recognition, where you start talking about these kind of things. They say, wow, the privacy, you cannot do that, and so on. But they are studying ways, and there are examples of things it's possible to do. And they will present the project, the final project, in the next 2-3 months to the mayor, to the council of the town, and the project should be approved. Mm-hmm. What they have approved is the idea to have a test in April, May, as I said, probably it will be May, a test which will last maybe a month, something like that. The idea is to introduce this new ticket, let's call it ticket or fee or whatever you want, not every day all over the year, but in some periods, maybe July and August, Carnival and things like that. And then there is the point, how much? To the mayor, who is smart, like all politicians, they're more than clever, they are normally smart. He said, if I say €20, for sure there will be a good part of the council against, and we will never do that. So they started saying €5. But €5, of course, is nothing. The tourists or the excursionists coming to Venice, they are already paying €9.50 to take the motorboat, while a resident, we pay 1.5. But if you are coming to Venice, you have to pay $9.50 to go from the station to San Marco, and another time $9.50 to come back. For a family, multiplied by 3, 4, 5, it's a big amount of money. But when we introduced 15 years ago, something like that, and it was European Union was not in favor, but then at the end they accepted that because it was a purpose tax. They accepted that. We didn't have a drop. We didn't have any drop in the number of visitors of Venice. The people continue to come, pay, and that's it. If you put another €5, €5 nowadays is nothing. No, okay, It's less than a pack of.
So it's just a bit of tokenism then.
No, you know, so 5 for sure is wrong. Then we are in the hands of the policymakers, democracy. They have to vote. They have to get the majority. Will they, at the end, will say 10, 15? My idea was 20, 25. Look at Amsterdam. Amsterdam, they have already decided to put the city tax from the 1st of January next year. I don't remember if 20 or 25 euros per day. If you want really to find something different, to introduce something to modify the things, like we have done with the cruises.
Yeah, no, that's a really big policy move there, what they banned certain tonnage to come. But I just want to move on to just one of the big themes in our report is about sourcing local, buying local, and to help in reducing this economic leakage. As a policymaker, I mean, how can policymakers help SMEs, which are it's a very fragmented sector, isn't it? A lot of SMEs.
Absolutely.
How can you help them to go on that trajectory to help? You know, we have sustainable tourism. And what, as a policymaker, we've only got a few minutes left, but yeah, what are your thoughts there on that?
A couple of things. One is that you have to help them with some fiscal benefits.
In what way?
You have to deduct when they have all the kind of businesses they are. You have to find ways to provide them with support in this and that. Could be money. You deduct taxes from that percentage to this new percentage. Like we're doing on the contrary, for example, on people who is renting apartments for short periods, 5 days, 3 days, a week, or something like that. We have a new law, I think it will start in these days, actually, where if you have one apartment, you pay 20% taxes, flat tax, 21. If you have 2, 3, 1,000, you pay much more. It's a new law. This is a very good way to limit something which became a good business very often for foreigners, for companies, which is nothing to do with the poor physical person, old, he has a house, so they rent a room and things like that. It's another story. No, it's becoming a business. So this is a way.
They need help. The SMEs need help.
Okay. The second point, 3 points I will tell you. The second point, we are trying to do that at central level to help SMEs to merge, to find ways to be together, because they need big shoulders. They don't. We have in Italy 60%, and the OECD countries we are in between 60 to 70% SMEs on the total of all the private sector. Huge, too much. You could Mexico 80%. So to try to help them to merge, because if you need money, there is no way. If you are nobody, if you are a very micro, micro company, you have to go to the bank there in the corner and you say, yes, what do you want, please? They put your data on the computer. The person in front of you has no power to do anything. They put the data inside the computer, and after when they finish, the computer says, "Poop." It means, no, we don't give you money. Thank you, bye-bye. Write a letter to the director, that's all. No? So you need to have big shoulders, okay?
Yeah. So they do need a seat at the table, these SMEs,
and
they don't have that power just yet.
It's not easy, but we are trying to do that with the help of, we have in Italy a central organization with money. They, for example, help companies saying, we put 10 of them, we help you to put together a consortium, or call it as you want, to put together, and we buy 30% of that, and we give you fresh money to help you to organize this kind of thing. It works in some way, especially in south of Italy, in hospitality. The name of the organization is La Cassa, it's a Napoleon idea, and it works in Italy, in France, in places where Napoleon had power at that time, and it works very well. We help small companies to merge. And it's quite new. It's not more than 5 or 6 years we are doing that, and it works. The third point is education.
Okay.
With courses.
And are we talking about green literacy skills here as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is
we
critical.
Need that for everything technology, but mainly on sustainability.
Yep. Yep.
Mainly on sustainability, because nobody is ready. Nobody. Everybody has its own experience. Training on the job. No, it doesn't work anymore. You have to learn. And training, it's a long life learning. Because things are changing down in the street. Every morning, you cannot continue to do the same. You have to change, to modify. But you don't have time to go to the courses. So you have to learn from somebody, go to a school, university. There are associations that are doing that, no profit.
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised this, because one of the key findings of our report is that the women in the workplace and this gender parity, and tourism seems to attract women. We only got a minute left. Any thoughts on why women are attracted to this sector? Why we have this kind of, this very small gap between in pay in this sector?
Absolutely. The
in
gender.
In a minute.
Okay. Then I have the other thing I wanted to say before, which I want to tell you. I don't forget. No. The gender is something very important.
Okay.
54% of jobs in tourism worldwide are of women. 54, which is 10. 12 points more than any other sector, say women. But it's the entry job, okay? In my university, my courses at the university, my class, 90% are women, girls.
That's really interesting.
90%. Not this year, every year.
And that wasn't the case maybe 50?
But there is the scissors diagram. You know the scissors diagram?
Not really, but...
you should know.
Okay.
Send me people. If you come to read exams.
Later, I'll talk about that later.
The scissor, it means when you start, you have 90% women, 10%, okay?
Oh, okay.
Entry jobs, 54%. It's like that. But if you go to middle management, it becomes like that. Still today, middle management, it's already in the hands of girls.
That's good to hear.
Absolutely, in tourism, everywhere in the world, OECD countries. But then, if you go to the top, it turns. 95–9% of CEO of big groups in tourism are men, not women. We need another 10 years.
Yeah, so we need a change of culture there.
Yeah, it's change of culture. It's the old people like me, where we are,
You're training the new generation.
Yeah. We have, absolutely.
At university.
I'm always talking about that. But the new generation is ready. It's just a matter of time. It's inevitable. It goes like that. Yeah. Middle management, it's already but very high percentage in the hands of women. Nowadays, we have to wait a little bit, like the pilot of the airplanes.
Well, this is a very good note to end on, Armando. Thank you so much for telling us about...
Two things.
Okay.
First of all,
yes.
Anything we have written, I say we have because I have actively participated to the workshops and so on, is that whatever you imagine, you always need what we call private-public partnership.
Yeah.
Where in many, many territories, in several countries, for sure in Europe, sometimes also in other continents, but mainly Europe, where this partnership work, you get the best results.
That's a really good way to end on a very positive note, that PPP is a kind of a bit of the future here.
Is the most
and I
important
think we'll probably, from the floor, they'll probably ask you questions about this in practice, how that will work in practice, which is really critical. Armando, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
Ciao,
thank you again. Thank you. Great. Well, now I would love to welcome to the stage Ben Fogle, who needs no introduction, author, travel writer, broadcaster, so many things, and former UN patron of the wilderness, which is great. Thank you for joining us today. This is great. So I mean, I know you wear many hats, but as a kind of a travel writer, I would love to start by asking you about how should we write about travel today in a responsible way? And also how you've seen the gaze change over the years.
I find myself really conflicted because I have been in the travel sector, traveling prolifically for best part of 25 years, nearly 30 years, and I've probably seen quite a lot of changes in that time. As an environmentalist, I always struggle with my enhanced carbon footprint, and I think that's been, proven. It's not rocket science, that bit, but the travel to and from the destinations is one of the highest carbon impacts.
About 49, 50%,
exactly,
isn't it? Yeah.
And I've long known that. So first of all, to avoid being accused of being a hypocrite, I'm acutely aware of that, and I try to make changes in other parts of my life because I still see the benefits of tourism, in my mind, outweigh the enhanced carbon travel. And the reason for that is because of everything we've seen in this report, the benefits it brings to those local economies, the benefits it brings to the communities, to socio-economic progress, to enhancing female empowerment in different places. So for me, I have long justified that enhanced carbon footprint on my part from all of those benefits. So I find it fascinating hearing and reading the report today because I've seen that firsthand. What I think I can bring to this, which Armando kind of focused very much on urban areas, a lot of my travel is to rural, wilderness regions. And in answer to your question, we have a great responsibility as a travel writer and a broadcaster. What happens is I'll make a film about polar bears in Svalbard, and people will see me getting really close to polar bears. And the reaction is that people want the experience they see on television, they read in the newspapers, or they watch on TikTok. And I think we have a responsibility to say, okay, I made that film for millions of people to watch, or millions of people to read, so that they don't actually have to go and do it. Now, of course, I'm aware that people could go, well, you're okay, aren't you, because you got to do it. How does that work? But I also think that that's part of being a travel writer, or part of being a travel presenter, is that we do it so other people don't have to. But I was making a film...
Does that worry you about inclusivity then? I mean,
well, I'll tell you what worries me is that I make films about hidden places, and that what happens, so I've just made a big film about the Congo. Not a huge number of people go to the French Congo.
No.
I know what's going to happen after this film because it's such an extraordinary place and it's actually quite accessible. It's going to put a lot of focus. Now, a lot of people I met there want that tourism. They were saying, thank you for coming to visit our nation, and they're actually one of the nations that we can probably get onto that are pushing for high-end tourism. I don't necessarily agree with this economic kind of sliding scale, the Bhutanese kind of model where certain nations are trying to encourage just a high-end tourism where other nations perhaps are going for the low-end tourism.
What sort of framework do you
I think it should be. I think like everything. Do you know what? I look at life a bit like our diet. I've never been a dieter. I am not a vegetarian. I'm not a pescatarian. I'm not a vegan. But I eat little bits of meat occasionally, very rarely, like red meat, never. A little bit of white meat. A lot of vegetables. Anyway, I'm digressing a lot. It's obviously something about this chair. But my point here is that I think everything we do in life should be spread out a little bit, and that we shouldn't just focus on the one thing. So when we talk about tourism to places like London, traditionally, tourists have gone to Buckingham Palace, and they have gone to Trafalgar Square, and they've gone to Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. But as time has progressed, the Shard has become a place where people might want to go to, the London Eye. And I think if we look at wilderness places, I think we need to do the same. National parks, it's a fascinating model.
Yeah, and I do want to ask you about national parks, and because you mentioned Costa Rica, because in our report we do cover that and how they've tried to champion themselves as this kind of eco-tourist place to be. And so if countries want to go down that path, I mean, what's your advice? I know you say in your book Inspire you don't like to hector or lecture, but what would be the advice to countries that want to go down that path?
Well, it's a difficult one. On one hand, you could do the Venice option. You could charge people, which is what Costa Rica did. And it was quite high. I mean, it was really high. When I lived in Costa Rica for a year, and I think 30 years ago it was $30 maybe even up to $50 just to visit one of their national parks. And they got a lot of criticism at the time because it was seen as prohibitively expensive and would be socio-economically excluding. It would exclude people of a certain socio-economic background. And if we look at our national parks in this country, I was the president of the campaign for national parks, and one of our great things was to try and change the type of people that were going to our parks. Traditionally, it's been white middle-class males, and we don't even have a fee. But as soon as you start imposing a fee on those national parks, that's going to be incredibly prohibitive for the very people that we want to have access to these places.
So that's not a policy that really works here in the UK, because we're sensitive to all of that.
I just don't think that could ever work. But I actually believe that so I'm half Canadian, and actually when I grew up, there's a park there called Algonquin Park, and they have limits to just numbers, full stop. And it's a bit like the marathon lottery. And they have a certain number of people that can visit. You put in your application, and you either get that ticket for that year or you don't. If you don't go, you can give that ticket to someone else. Personally, that's the kind of model that I believe will work, because over-tourism is happening everywhere. It's not just Venice, it's happening on Everest. When I was there, the number of people is extraordinary who are going. Now, I'm aware that me as a travel writer and travel journalist making a film about climbing Everest, of course, is going to impact the number of people wanting to go. But it's much more complex than that. I was just filming on Skye up in the Outer Hebrides, and I saw my first sort of TikTok tourism. Huge busloads of people arriving, literally getting off, doing their little TikTok video in the same place. You know, there was one location they had to do it, and then getting on and moving on. And we've seen this with the Austrian village that was the setting for Frozen. We're seeing individual, tiny focused places that are feeling the Venice effect.
It's almost a lack of imagination, in a way.
Well, and
people want to replicate.
So to bring it back full circle to where I think travel journalists can actually be a benefit, it's by spread. You know, I know there's travel journalists in here and watching online. I think the responsibility of being a travel journalist, a travel writer, whether you're working for a magazine, a newspaper, or on television, is to diversify that, so that all the focus is not go to Venice. Oh, we love Venice, by the way. Don't all go to Venice. There's already 35 million people there. There are other extraordinary places. And the other thing that I just want to, which I was really thinking when I was listening to all of this, the most important thing for me when it comes to sustainability, particularly with wilderness spaces, is to put a value on those wild habitats.
And
that's
how
what
would we
tourism,
do?
and that's what tourism does.
Right.
Because as soon as a population realized that this area of rainforest or this desert region or this area of savanna or mountain has a tourist value, it suddenly it makes it less attractive to turn it over to palm oil. It makes it less attractive to turn it over to housing development, because they realize that there is great economic benefits that will come. But this is the long term. It's what Armando was saying. There's that great quote that a society grows great when old men grow trees under the shade of which they will never sit. That's where we have to be.
We kind of see that in our report as well. We look at low-income countries, and Kenya particularly, where they relied, and it dried up a bit of the money during COVID, money they were relying on from tourism to help conservation efforts. And so it's kind of like a catch-22. You want to protect it, and you need money from some source, but then what do you do when it gets out of hand? So another theme in our report is about this kind of tension between tourists and the locals. And if you read, the global code of ethics, we have a right for tourism, for leisure and pleasure, and all that. So, I mean, how's that balance? I mean, how can we get that balance right?
Well,
the tension between the tourists and the local people. I mean, so everyone's happy. So, tourism is for everyone.
Well, the marker for me is as soon as tourism starts affecting negatively the behavior of those or that into which territory they have gone to the negative, that is where it's impacting. So as soon as tourists heading to look at mountain gorillas or heading to see grizzly bears, as soon as those animals are starting to become habituated to people and coming up and eating from the sharks in South Africa because of the cage diving, as soon as we start affecting the behavior, Venice with the local residents, I think we've seen it in multiple places with signs up, get out tourists. You know, we've seen the little kind of the war that is happening between locals and people. So that's the marker. In terms of the answer, gosh, if I knew that, I'd have written my own report. But I think it is just about taking personal responsibility. I think we as tourists have to think about the impact that we are having, and I'm amazed at how few people are aware of the impact they may be having. And when it comes to the very fragile dynamic of indigenous communities in South America, Southeast Asia, across the African continent, that is a very precious one, because I have been to
the fragile places like
well,
that.
I've been to indigenous peoples' communities that have been heavily affected by tourism, and I've seen how that has changed everything to the negative in my mind. But I've also been to indigenous communities that are completely unaffected, and I know there is a middling ground. But I think it's a bit like everything. It's a bit like climate change. I think we have to take personal responsibility. Now, it's very easy to look to the OECD, or it's very easy to look for governance to say, we are going to make these policies. But as we heard, government changes, even in this country. Well, this country is even worse than Italy, I think, recently. We're changing so frequently that there is no long-term objective. So when there's no long-term objective, because our Prime Minister is just dropping all his sustainability, green ethics, green policy anyway, because he doesn't think we can do it, what kind of message does that send out? So we have to take our own personal responsibility. And then, therefore, as travel writers, as travel journalists, we have a responsibility to share those, write those down in our writings and in our programs.
And do you think there's a shift? You know, obviously we've had this model from the 1950s until, I don't know, quite recently, this mass tourism model and high numbers game. And I mean, we want to get high value. We want to have maybe limited experiences, but of such high value. How do you see that playing out? I mean, we don't want to ration anything, but is that where it might head in the future?
I don't know if I've totally got your question right, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe, slightly controversially, that we are probably traveling a bit too much. I think it's a bit too cheap, and I think we just need to change that. And I'm aware it's controversial because that could be seen as socioeconomically...
inclusivity.
Yes. It's not fair on everyone. I actually think there could be a sliding scale for those according to how much we earn and how much
Can you
we
elaborate
could pay.
on that?
Yeah, I think that I don't see why, if I went to visit... So let me give you an example. So let's say I went to one of our national parks. Let's say let's take Venice as an example. So the €5, I don't see why someone doesn't say, okay, well, what is your earning? Okay, we could fabricate our earnings, but we know what our tax returns are supposed to be. So it's kind of taking personal responsibility. Someone like me pays €50. Because I have on a relative scale,
on ability to pay.
A bit like they've done with, I think, driving fines in certain parts of the world. You pay the fine not as a standard fine, but according to your income. And I don't see why there isn't a possibility that for tourism, because it has to be inclusive. I'm a firm believer that everyone should have the ability to go to Everest or go to Venice or go to our national parks. I think everyone. I don't think it should be the exclusivity of those who can just afford it.
Okay, it's a very radical idea.
Well, yeah,
because
maybe
we've been trying to do that in healthcare, and it's not easy. You know, that's and how would you put that into practice?
But let's be honest, travel is still a luxury. It's I don't think it is necessarily something that we. I think it's a luxury. I think it's a very important luxury. I think it's probably, for me, it's the most important thing in my life. I can't imagine a life without having travel, both for work, but also for family and for pleasure. And I've also seen firsthand the benefits it brings to local communities. I can't tell you, especially post-COVID, going to countries that had been completely closed off. You know, I saw people, hoteliers, people who'd invested everything into those small businesses who were on their knees. And it frustrated me when we heard, that there is a sector of society, especially of people who, like me, are worried about the climate, who think that we should stop travel. I hear from them. I get shouty emails from people saying that everything I'm doing is destroying the planet. I recognize that there is problems, but I still think the benefits outweigh that. There was an interesting story about, interesting for me, about 20 years ago, I did a job for, I won't specify the country, but I was asked to do a job for a country that was under close scrutiny for their exploitation of the land for palm oil. And I was invited by their tourism department to make some films about adventure tourism as a form of diversification. And I went and did that with quite, I think I had good environmental sentiments, that by encouraging tourism, it would wean part of their sector away from the reliance on palm oil. But what was quite interesting is that the result was that I ended up on the front page of a newspaper saying that I was the face of eco-destruction because I was daring to condone a tourism to a country that doesn't have a great environmental track record. But surely we should be empowering places that haven't got those great environmental track records to make those changes. And I think we're in this, we've got ourselves into such a pickle now that if you dare to say that you're an environmentalist, the first thing someone's going to say is, oh yeah, where are your shoes from? How much cotton went into that jacket? You're going to be picked up on those shortcomings. And what that does is it terrifies people away. But if we switch that from this insistence that the 10% of us make 100% change to our lives, and cross the ocean like Greta Thunberg does on a sailboat every time, then what if we just change that and we said to all 100% of the population, let's just try to make let's start really low, let's just try and make a 1% change and then increase that. And I really do firmly believe that tourism is part of this whole model.
So starting from a baseline of accepting reality of where we are. So another area that is really quite big in how we're going to get to this sustainable tourism is and there's a flurry of these sustainable certificates and schemes, sustainable destinations, sustainable hotels and all that. I mean, how do you see that? How can consumers make better choices based on all of that? How do you see that playing out? Or do you have worries at all about all of that?
Well, I do have worries because you can pick your own truth really now, can't you? You can say you're sustainable. It's very difficult to say that one thing is more sustainable than the next. Just look at the electric car model. I am a proud electric car driver, but I'm aware someone else in this room may go, that is actually far worse, ... So we can pick our own truths when it comes to it. So when you have a travel company saying they are sustainable or the hotel is sustainable, I am skeptical. I'm just a consumer here, remember. I know I'm not an expert, but even I'm skeptical as to that because it's very easy to... Are you
concerned that maybe it's a form of greenwashing?
I don't know who is over... Well, there's, this term greenwashing, I've seen firsthand. I'm acutely aware of it. I get invited to do jobs occasionally where it's very obvious why they want me there, and I try to avoid that. And I think the greenwashing thing is a problem, but I also think we mustn't underestimate just how clever a lot of the consumers are out there. So on one hand, I'm amazed at how sometimes tourists aren't fully aware of the impact they may be having on the wildlife around them. But on the other hand, they're very savvy now. And I think that we have to credit people with, thinking laterally, is this airport really sustainable? ... But I also think that we have to empower people to make those changes. And if people are terrified to not do it, then where do we go from there?
So in our last kind of 10 minutes, I want to go back to kind of nature and the wilderness, because that's your strongest affinity. And you obviously, you were the UN patron of the wilderness. I'd love to understand a little bit about what your priorities were and during that role. Did you feel you achieved anything? And also to go back to nature in a more general sense, I don't know if you've read this book by, it was called The Last Child of the Woods. And it's all about how my background's healthcare, so nature deficit disorder. This fact that we're spending less time in nature, and so it's vital, we need it. And in your book Inspire, you talk about nature as being a healer for you, and so how so basically, what was your role, and how can we get back to nature, but in small ways? We're not going to all climb Mount Everest like you, which is an amazing achievement, well done. But how can we get back to nature in small ways? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think so. For me, nature, the wilderness, almost any green space, to be honest. So we look out of this window, you may just see big buildings beyond us, but there are hundreds and hundreds of green spaces. And for me, all those green spaces are sanctuaries. Those are places where we can reconnect with wildlife in various forms. Okay, in central London, it's actually mainly invasive species like green parakeets, but there is still a connection to nature. And it's been proven in many reports, nature is a great healer, and this deficit that many of us are experiencing, it's one of the reasons why so many people are being drawn to wild spaces now. It's why forest bathing that started in Japan and became very popular in Scandinavia is now expanding here. Cold water swimming, all of these things. It's about reconnecting from that disconnect that is this. And when you look at this, this is an amazing view. Apologies, those who are watching at home, you might not be able to see beyond us, but when you see the cityscape of London, on one hand, it takes my breath away because it's so beautiful and it shows what humanity can do. But on the other hand, it's slightly horrifying because where does this end? Does this just keep sprawling across the world with population growth? And what does that mean for our wild spaces? So in answer to your question, what did my role as patron of the wilderness mean with the UNEP? It was about trying to contextualize the value of those wild spaces, those wilderness spaces. Our wilderness environment is continuing to decline around the world as population continues to grow. And I think it's only now that we are valuing what those mean to us.
And who were you talking to? Business leaders, everyone, policymakers? Was it
exactly all of that? Okay. Children, schools. It was everyone really. Yeah. I think it was, having travelled as much as I have done, I felt a responsibility to share those experiences and also translate those experiences. I think I did so much travel, literal. I look at travel on many different levels. There's the literal travel, which I think is what's getting us into problems right now. The literal travel being, I want to go to Paris to see the Eiffel Tower and have a picture taken of it with my fingers so it looks like I'm holding it. So that is, the literal travel that is then translated into TikTok and Instagram and Twitter with a younger generation who want to go. But there are many other forms of travel, as we all know. There's more immersive travel where you go to Sicily and you live with a family where they teach you to cook amazing pasta and things. And then there's adventure tourism, climbing Mount Everest, running the Marathon des Sables across the Sahara Desert. So actually travel has so many different facets to it. And I think if we could start pulling that out and taking away the focus from those individual areas, that would be one of the answers.
Yeah, no, there's a typology that we haven't really sliced and diced and understand. There's cultural tourism, there's even medical tourism, and back to this, we're in this beautiful city of London, this amazing backdrop behind us. So just to kind of end on this note a bit, so how can cities work better with out-of-city tourism, destinations to help those impacts? I mean, is there any learnings from the two that can connect in some way in your thoughts?
Obviously, city tourism, in my mind, urban tourism and rural tourism are kind of different but the same. I think this economic leakage is really fascinating. I haven't even touched on that, and I'm aware I don't really want to get too involved because I really don't know. This is just my observations as a traveller. But again, I go to certain countries where you see huge hotels or big restaurants, but that those are not local. It's big international brands. So I know when I'm in there, a bit like the television analogy, the money that I'm giving to the local economy, apart from maybe a couple of locals who are probably employed and paid a very low rate to work there, most of that money is leaking away. So I personally think that trying to shore up that leakage sounds like a pretty logical thing to do. I get, as a tourist, when I go, I try to not buy stuff. But the thing that really riles me is when they are selling beautiful Italian glass made elsewhere, made in another country. Because then it's just becoming painting by numbers, isn't it? For me, tourism should be about eating the local food, meeting the local people, immersing myself in that place. But perhaps to try to justify this idea that I think tourism has become too cheap in some ways is that it shouldn't be about having a big international hotel that can have the cheapest rooms that you can possibly get that then goes back, but that's the only way you can get the cheap rooms. It shouldn't be about the food all being imported from elsewhere because that is the cheapest food. And it shouldn't be about the tourist items that are going to be bought, tea towels and fridge magnets being made overseas because those are the cheapest things. You should pay a slight premium to have the finest tomatoes that have been grown in the garden there. You should be staying in people's equivalent to Airbnb, you know, little local hotels or hostels. You should be buying locally bought
and
stuff.
That's what I'm hearing from you, is that if you buy local and source local, there is a premium with that. And
well, I think
that
you have
model,
to pay. We know that. We have to. I think you have to pay a premium when you have. We don't like it. I'm a globalist, by the way. I think it's great to have, you know, connections all over the world, but I'm aware, especially with what's happening in the world now, I'm becoming increasingly aware that we may be forced to actually start thinking more about producing all of those things within our own country. And what an amazing thing that would be, you know, if we really could, when tourists come here, everything that they are consuming and buying has been made here by the population that live here. So I'd like to think, in answer to your question, that when people come to London and they go to restaurants and they go to hotels, listen, we have a huge wealth of, we have a mix here, don't we? So I'm sure there's plenty of economic leakage from London. There's no way it all stays in this city. But it would be nice if we could just start shoring up a little bit of that leakage.
It's a really hard one to assess because economic leakage, and as an economist, you want efficiency. So it's a really hard balancing equation. But if we're looking at risk benefits, you know, with the tourism sector, it's really great to hear, you know, the changes that are coming along with the Glasgow Declaration, with the World Tourist Organization thinking about ESG indicators now and all of that. I suppose the last 2 minutes, I want to ask you about just consumers and their literacy about better responsible tourism. How would you mark it out of 10 if I had to ask you?
I think it depends on where those tourists are coming from. It comes back to, again, a really important thing that we were talking about before. Education is so important here. Education with all of those working in the tourism sector, but also the tourists themselves. And I think tourist companies have a great responsibility to I think there's a great pressure a lot of tourist companies have. I've seen it firsthand when they are taking clients, visitors out, especially to wild places, to give them the best wildlife experience they can. Because on the front cover of their brochure, they have a picture of a whale this close. So those going on that expect to get that close to the whale. Well, you know, I've been whale watching off Sri Lanka. Pardon my language, it's a shit show. It is horrifying. And I've seen some of the worst forms of wildlife sustainable tourism. All those ships say they're the most sustainable things. They pile hundreds of people on these ships and terrify the whales, to just chase them around. It made me physically sick. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of problems around the world with too many people wanting those close engagements with the wildlife, or trampling, you know, beautiful habitat. Everest, we could talk for hours about Everest, the impact people have, just the amount of feces on the mountain. You know, it's not something we really want to talk about, but yeah, how do 1,000 people live for months pooing in the same place where it just freezes and sits there? It's a big problem, and it's a big complex problem, but I also think there's a lot of people thinking about it. And in answer to your question, because I know we're winding up now, I think that education is absolutely key. I've got 2 children, 11 and 13. When I still suggest we go away on holidays, overseas, we travel, they are the ones that go, what kind of impact is that going to have? What they think about the benefits it will have. So we are now, we used to do a lot of trips together as part of what I do anyway. We are now down to very few kind of what I would call proper overseas trips, and that's because my children are leading that. If it wasn't for them, there would be much more. And I think that's interesting. So I don't know whether
that's... a bit of self-rationing going on there.
Yeah, and I really think we mustn't underestimate our youth. When we talk about the problems of the world, our youngsters are being pretty well educated now. They're pretty savvy. You know, they know. And when it comes back to that great quote, you know, the society grows great, I think our children realize that this planet, all of this, is not just for us to enjoy now. We've got to make sure that not just the next generation or the one after that, but the one after that and the one after that, that they also have the opportunities we have, and they have the kind of landscapes that we have had as well to enjoy. Great words to end on, yes, and the future is in the hands of our youth. So thank you so much, Ben. That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great. I'm going to hand back to John now, who will do the Q&A.
Wonderful. Yeah, please stay. Amanda, please join us.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Oh, it's a long way down. So we have some time. I have some questions, but I don't want to hog the floor. So please, questions from the floor. We have a mic, so people online can hear us, but love to hear any questions from the floor for our great speakers, but also, to be honest, about the report as well. So please, any questions?
So it seems, I mean, a lot of the conversation today has been revolving around this idea of moderation or a need for balance. And I wanted to drill maybe a little bit more into the compromise or the kind of payoff between long and short-term thinking. Armando, you brought it up, and then Ben, you obviously, that Elton Trueblood quote about sitting the shade of trees that you'll never sit under. So yeah, I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how we can ensure, short-term benefits for the people alive today, especially in the travel industry and in different cities, without compromising long-term benefit and future generations.
Great question. Anyone? Amanda? Is that the one?
I'm not sure I understood everything you said, because you were talking. You want to know how to tell me.
Essentially, how to balance the short and long term.
Yeah.
Benefits.
Well, I'm just thinking in very many different situations, because there are destinations. Any destination had its own personality, problems, positive and negative sides. So the best thing is you have immediately positive results when you discover that you have touristic potentiality. So you invest. We discover in the last 10 years that the best way to have a very positive starting season is to participate to some international events. If we were talking about 20 or 30 years ago, the beginning was just advertising, big campaigns and things. Nowadays it's to have the Olympic Games, well, this is for big things, or to participate in other events, could be whatever. That is really jumping. For example, in Milano was never, I'll give you an Italian example, it has never been a touristic town up to 10 years ago. We had hotels that were closing in July and August. It was a business town for fashion, for many other things, but not for tourism. Then it was a very good idea of the mayor of that time. We won the, we host the, what's the name of that? I forgot the name now. We hosted a very important event on food. I forgot the name of that. Anyway, in 2015, tourism, the line of tourism was like that since many years. We had we hosted that huge event. The tourism went up like that, but after that, it remained and continued to grow slowly, but it didn't go back. So now the first thing is that you have some potentiality. You have a volcano, a lake, the sea, the whatever it is, the festival, music for young people. It's whatever it is. You have immediately benefits because, for example, another thing which goes for all territories, the Airbnb situation when they started with the sharing economy, sharing economy. We have areas in many places, in all countries in Europe, hotels are in classic touristic destinations or in big towns. We have huge areas, territories without hotels, in France, in Austria, in Germany, in Italy. Suddenly, from one day to the other one, we discover that you could go to sleep anywhere because you put it on the internet and you find a room. You find a flat, a villa, whatever you find, and you can go. And that was the beginning. This is, for example, which kind of benefits they got, these small villages which were outside of the picture of tourism. They got that they opened a shop, a pizzeria, a taxi driver, maybe a pub for the night, a restaurant. Other people started to rent the things. So you have money and jobs. This is the immediate fact. It grows, and then you do nothing. Just you get the money and you get the jobs and you're happy. Then when you have too much tourism, you start having the problems. And you immediately realize you cannot do just that and solve the problems, but you have to plan with the specific policy how to go and work against over-tourism, against pollution, against social sustainability problems, economical problems, with all the things, and I can give you thousands of examples if you want, but this is something that it's more and more. Venice started 20 years ago having these problems. Now this is something that everybody, it's very interesting on the report, for example, the example of Bruges. I remember we studied Bruges, together with Bruges, the problem of over-tourism about 20 years ago. They've been able to do something that in Venice was not possible. They managed, they worked on the management of flows. They took a lot of, for example, of important touristic attractions, let me call you with this bad expression, touristic attractions, in the outskirts of the town. And so the people went outside. Look at Paris with the Walt Disney resort or things like that. Now, you have to manage the flows, so to take people outside of the center, and then but to do that, you need a lot of time, a lot of money, and things. If you want to, the future of tourism is that the people, the destinations facing over tourism will be more and more and more and more and more. So we have to start planning that. And when I mean planning, it means you need a lot of money and at least 10, 15 years.
Right.
It's a matter of a long time. I mean, it's
money and time.
Money and time. And PPP.
Yep, good point.
PPP.
Good point. We're coming towards the end. Any final questions from the floor? I have one selfish question, but any final questions from the floor? Oh, please.
Thank you both. Thank you all so much. It's been such a fantastic conversation. Just around the piece on the value of tourism, which I know, Ben, you spoke about quite a lot, is what needs to be done for people to further understand the value of tourism? Like if there's 1, 2 things that people, businesses, organizations, governments can do at every level to ensure that that value is understood, what are they?
Well, I think first of all, it's to, I don't think we can underestimate those leakages. I see it so much. You go to Kenya, you go to an amazing safari, and you start thinking, who owns, who has put all this infrastructure in? How is this work? You know, we talk about the trickle-down effect and that money is definitely going to all the locals, and you see local guides, but then you start asking how much they're getting and how much they're earning. And I think there's a lot of skeptical people like me who will be thinking, well, okay, is tourism really benefit? It's just a big part of the global economy, isn't it? It's all going to a big hotel group. I was going to name check one, but I think there is a lot of skepticism about really how much that tourism is genuinely affecting locals. I thought that statistic about how it is improving, forgive me for my terminology here, but increasing the number of women who are working, especially in countries maybe where traditionally they have been lower down the order. I think we can't underestimate the importance that it has in that sense. And I think it's, again, back to education. I think a report like this is so valuable. You know, some of the things that we've heard. You know, I read the newspapers about how damaging second homes are and the cost of living all going up and how it's destroying our seaside towns in the West Country. I don't know. You know, I'm just saying what I read in the papers, and I think there is a lot of regurgitated stuff. And I think it's very easy for a couple of angry residents to make a big noise on social media, and then that suddenly is the problem. A couple of posters start going up, get rid of second homeowners. But then you start reading, well, actually, it's not necessary. You know, maybe there's examples like St Ives, where, which I think is, I think in that report it says that places that have already had high tourism, that maybe that is becoming house prices do start going up, but it was already there. It was already kind of slipping that way. And I think, in answer to your question about short-term, long-term, I just think it's about spreading the love. So a bit like the Olympics. I don't think when the Olympics come to a country, it should go to one city. I think it should be London and Birmingham and Manchester and Bristol and Liverpool, and each place gets one. So great example, Eden Projects. Look what that did for Cornwall. Amazing. They're building one in Morecambe Bay now. Now, Morecambe Bay, it's not exactly off the tourism trail, but that is going to do amazing things. When we talk about this amazing dome that they have in Las Vegas, that we may bring to Stratford, but there's a lot of people that don't want it there. Why bring it to London when we've already got so much stuff? Why is it not going to Scunthorpe or to Bognor Regis? I don't know. I'm pulling some names out of the hat, but places maybe that could really benefit from that and that could then have the sort of Eden Project effect. And it's not having a negative impact on the short term because people are still going to the Eden Project. They're still going to be coming to all these places. But what it's doing is just spreading the love a little bit.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Listen, we have run out of time, so I will draw it to a close. So let me just finish with a few thank yous. I really want to thank you, thank our great guests. I really, please give them a round of applause. Really great to have you guys here. Really great to have you both here. I want to thank Booking.com for supporting us. Without them, we wouldn't be here. I want to thank you guys for joining us in the room, but also everyone joining us online. We are super proud of this work. Please download the report. If you're time poor, there's an exec summary, right? Please download it. And again, we are so proud of this work, but we see this as the start of the conversation. You know, we've shared so much and the wonderful examples and stories and policies to discuss. We want to keep discussing this for a long time. So we really thank you all for being here. Encourage you all to download the report. And that's it from Economist Impact. I hope you all stay well. Stay in touch. Take care. Thanks all. Great.